So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to STP's second session on the Town Centre Action Plan Review. This one focuses on place delivery and funding models. I'm Mary Donachie and I'm chairing the session today on behalf of STP with help from Alison, Ewan and Holly, who are doing all the hard work behind the scenes. We've got a series of excellent speakers who will each give a short and focused presentation on their specialist subject. We've got a couple of small changes to the nominated speakers due to illness, but the organisations and the topics remain as per the agenda. Can I ask you all please to, as we work through today's session, to raise questions, queries and thoughts using the chat box. We've got 3 planned breaks for formal Q&A, but we'll also capture your comments in a follow-up note that will be circulated after the event. So to kick things off, first up, we have David Cowan, Head of Regeneration at Scottish Government, with an update on the government's place-based investment programme. So over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And I was interested to note that we're giving presentations on our specialist subject that you said there. So it feels like mastermind. So hopefully you don't ask too many difficult questions on our specialist subjects afterwards, because I might fail. But anyway, yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to come and talk about the place-based investment programme. I guess worth noting that the headline for that is that we have established a place-based investment programme, and the aim is to accelerate our ambitions for place, 20-minute neighbourhoods, town centre revitalisation and community-led regeneration. The programme, the investment side of the programme, if you like, is backed by an initial £325 million worth of capital funding over the next 5 years. And the programme builds on the impact and learning from the regeneration strategy, the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, and the Town Centre Action Plan. And I think it cements or aims to cement the need to put communities at the heart of our approach. And I think just briefly it's probably worth reflecting on the evolution of how we got here. I suppose from the regeneration strategy, for me personally, starting as head of regeneration unit when the regeneration strategy was published. That was 10 years ago now, or nearly 10 years ago. But that set out a vision for where our most disadvantaged communities are supported and where all places are sustainable and promote well-being. Probably as valid now as it was then. That was followed by the work that we did across government and with local government and with COSLA to establish the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund to embed the principles of the regeneration strategy, embedding place-based approach, tackling disadvantage, community involvement, and with a strong focus on outcomes. We also had the Town Centre Action Plan, following the first national review of town centres, swiftly followed with hopefully a reasonably concise and useful Town Centre Action Plan. Again, very much a partnership approach that we can deliver that with local government, but also with the communities themselves and other partners. And the Town Centre First principle and you know, the impact of that and what we learned from that. And that led us then to the place principle. I think sort of combining a lot of that learning that we had there, looking at what was happening in Scotland, a lot of people working on place-based approaches, but maybe not as much consistency as we might like, and perhaps not all pulling together. So the place principle adopted in 2019 to encourage community involvement and a more joined up collaborative approach across all sectors to enable better outcomes for everyone and increased opportunities for people and communities to shape their own lives. In essence, that is the foundations, or those are the foundations for the place-based investment programme. And the key elements of the place-based investment programme are now established. So I've mentioned the place principle, obviously, the funding, which I'll come back to, but also something which we probably haven't talked enough about is the place framework. And I'll just touch quickly on something that we're calling the Place Action Group. So the place framework is something that we've been working on in Scottish Government, but we've had aired with various different people to get feedback on it. And the intent there is to provide a consistent and proportionate basis for decision-making across all funding programs. Ultimately, the framework proposes that before investing in a place, it is first necessary to have established a shared plan for that place. And the framework also gives us a series of questions that will, for decision makers to consider some basic questions before any investment is made. We think that's pretty fundamental and basic, and that is going to be published on the Place website, which I understand will be going live later in September. But if anyone's more interested in that, please get in touch and we can possibly set up a separate session looking at that Place framework in a bit more detail. It is intended to be user friendly and straightforward. It's not the only way of doing this, but hopefully it will help. And then just quickly, the Place Action Group, which I mentioned, and somewhat ironically, something I've been pushing for quite a while. And the first meeting of the Place Action Group is taking place right now within Scottish Government as we speak. But I've forgone going there just to be with you here today. But the intent of the Place Action Group in the first instance is to facilitate joint working at a national level using the Place framework, but also to get behind pathfinders with traction and to develop collective local programs and plans and share examples of good practice. Fundamentally, as a first step, that is about trying to get Scottish Government to join up better, to look at across, initially capital programs, to see how we can align those better, get behind places. How do we collectively get behind local plans and start to put our Scottish Government investments, if you like, in place so that they're relevant to that place. Take account of what the local aspirations and ambitions are, and try to work together on the timing of those investments so that they make sense in places as well. So today that meeting is involving health, economy, islands teams, housing, social justice, and hopefully someone from regeneration is representing us there too. So, and that brings me to the funding, I guess. As I mentioned, it's £325 million over the next 5 years. Which is substantial. That's a significant increase on what we had before for Regeneration Capital Grant Fund and for sort of ad hoc town centre funding. The 325 million does include continuation of the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund over the next 5 years at £25 million per annum. And we've actually just gone through a stage 1 panel for next financial year. The program also includes some funding which we've kept aside for demonstration projects, which we're working up the detail of that currently. And then finally, I guess local government has got a very strong role to play on this. Delivery of the RCGF and the Town Centre Action Plan have been built on a strong partnership with COSLA and local government and communities as well. And the place-based investment program builds on that. And we've agreed an allocation of £140 million for local government over the next 5 years again. And in addition to place, town centres and 20-minute neighbourhoods, we've agreed this funding will also contribute to net zero, well-being, inclusive economic development, tackling inequality and disadvantage, and a strong requirement for community involvement and supporting community ownership. Overall, the place-based investment programme aims to link and align all place-based funding initiatives. In practice, hopefully, this means consideration will be given to how investments align locally in order to increase their impact. As I said, it's a 5-year programme. It's part of the 5-year capital spending review, and that funding has been baselined. So the assumption is that funding will be there year on year over the next 5 years, subject obviously to Parliament approving the budgets. And I think that's to me one of the most exciting aspects of this funding, and really quite important, is that gets us away from a year on year basis for capital funding. It allows us to take a longer look, take a strategic look, and hopefully start to join up and drive the change that we need and that we will need for COVID recovery to ensure that we continue to tackle inequality and disadvantage, supporting well-being economy ambitions and addressing climate change. So that longer term look, it presents really exciting opportunities for all of us. Not, as mentioned, Scottish Government and what we can do there, but equally, how can we work with local authorities and communities to deliver those longer term plans, to develop and deliver those longer term plans and line up the investment behind that, make sure that we're taking the time to think about that investment and doing it when it makes sense, instead of having to, always be kind of chasing annual funding and hoping for the best. What are the opportunities there to be bringing together health boards and local authorities, for example, to look at how we can make sure that the commitments around sort of local healthcare and access to local healthcare can be delivered. You know, how can local authorities perhaps be purchasing empty buildings and working with a health board to locate the services where they need to be, leveraging that funding. Likewise, what are the opportunities to use the place-based investment program to leverage housing funding and make sure that the housing is where we want it to be for town centre living and the like, or for that matter, for rural housing, what are the opportunities there? You know, expanding active travel, tackling vacant and derelict land, and also I think, you know, there's a discussion to be had about what are the opportunities to leverage private sector investment to tackle some of the big challenges that we know are out there. You know, our shopping centres that are half empty or half full, depending on how you look at it. How can we use that maybe to attract the private sector to look at how we can do things differently and reinvest in these places, and also to work with communities to see what we can do to repurpose these spaces as community facilities or other opportunities to create income. And I guess that's probably about all I was going to say on that right now. Leave it for questions otherwise. And as I say, for me, behind the scenes, it's about initially and starting, well, it's not starting today, but hopefully accelerating the pace today to really join the dots in Scottish Government to make this all start to come together. So it's about joining these bits together and working together rather than, you know, hoping that the different bits of investment, the different bits of energy, the different programs stumble together and work properly in places. We're actually getting behind that. So I'll stop there and open to questions, whether now or later. Thank you very much. Sorry, Mary, you're on mute there.
I'm back off mute, sorry about that. So thanks very much, David. That was an excellent introduction, setting the context for today's session, and great news that we have that long-term funding pot. Can I please ask people if they have any questions for David, can they please share them in the chat box? And we're going to pick these up at the end of the next session after 2:30. So I'm going to run straight into the next session where we have three very experienced place practitioners who are talking about funding and delivery models. And the first, so a couple of slight tweaks, as I said, to the agenda. And the first slight tweak, we've got Linda Gillespie, who's the Programme Manager for Community Ownership Support Service at Development Trust Association Scotland. Linda's followed by our very own Phil Prentice, Chief Officer of STP and the National Programme Director of Scotland's Improvement Districts. And last but far from least, we have Mick Doyle, who is the Team Leader for Supporting Communities at the Scottish Community Development Centre. This part's due to finish at around 2:30, so 3 5-minute presentations. We've then got 10-minute break for Q&As for these three speakers and also for David. So I'm going to pass over to you, Linda. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Mary. I know some of you will have heard me speak about community ownership, but today I'm actually filling in for Louisa McDonnell on DTAS, which is the organisation that the Community Ownership Support Service is housed in. So Development Trust Association Scotland is a membership organisation. We have 328 member organisations across the whole of Scotland. And within those development trusts, there's more than 53 members of those development trusts, so community members of development trusts. So community development trusts are community-led organisations that exhibit the following characteristics. So they're not actually a legal structure, they just have these characteristics. They're representative of a particular geographic area, be that a town, an island, a village or a neighbourhood. And it's an area that actually the communities would recognise themselves. They're membership organisations, they're democratically accountable to their members, and their board is drawn from those members. And they're multi-service delivery organisations. Now, while you can have really good social enterprises delivering fabulous services, if they're single issue organisations, that doesn't make them development trusts. So it's about that kind of multi-service aspect that's kind of key. And that there's a desire to move to sustainability with trading income and service level agreements. Now, the stats I'm just about to quote are pre-COVID. So ironically, those that are trading are probably likely to have been the strongest hit during COVID. But in 2019, they had a turnover of 57.9 million, of which 31 million was trading income. So development trusts are regarded as community anchor organisations who deliver a wide range of services. And this can be owning and managing large tracts of land and kind of significant heritage buildings. So many of you might have actually come across development trusts in terms of their aspirations to take on local assets or be reacting to the kind of loss of a heritage building. I suppose the majority of our members kind of run community hub type facilities, and there are a kind of range of kind of productive facilities in that mix, be that kind of pontoons, kind of shops, a kind of whole range. By the nature of the operations of development trusts, they are well connected into their local communities. They are responsive to these local needs. And I would say a very high proportion of our members have paid staff and are certainly working to make those posts sustainable going forward. And those characteristics kind of absolutely came to the fore in COVID. With kind of development trusts and community controlled housing associations just demonstrating how well connected they are in terms of distributing the Supporting Communities Fund. And that was either directly for their own programme delivery or to actually distribute through directly to communities on the ground. And I suppose there's, as people are kind of reflecting on the impact of COVID, I think one of the things that has come through and is coming through is the kind of role of kind of community anchor organisations round about the resilience of communities and actually supporting that. And certainly we had a kind of 160 members very active in this over COVID. So I suppose this was my kind of session was to sort of show delivery structures and community delivery structures. And I kind of didn't wish to kind of steal James's thunder in his section on legal structures at the end. But there isn't actually a legal structure for development trusts. They have those characteristics that I spoke about at the start. And the majority of the DTAS members are companies limited by guarantee with or without charitable status. But this is just basically because it's a very flexible structure that you can put trading subsidiaries on and actually you can work flexibly. I would say that pretty much all of the DTAS members, I couldn't actually think of a DTAS member who wouldn't be appropriately constituted to, but that's not to say that they're not there, to exercise the community rights round about either asset transfer under the Community Empowerment Act or the community rights to buy under the Land Reform Act. So, that is the structure that you can kind of hang assets on. And I think it's fair to say, in my experience with the community ownership support side of DTAS, where there's an established organisation, it is far easier to move forward with asset acquisition. And we're certainly unpicking the role of these anchors in supporting disadvantaged communities to secure assets, either for management or ownership. And based on that kind of 2019 survey that I had in terms of the levels of asset ownership, 165, 170 million pounds worth of assets are in community ownership within the DTAS membership. In kind of David's session at the start, he kind of highlighted the regeneration funding that's been in place for a good number of years now. And that actually has been a key funder in community ownership and community asset ownership, working with local authorities to prioritise kind of key assets. The Scottish Government Capital Regeneration Fund has been a key pillar in supporting that going forward. And certainly with the new funds, we would hope to see that kind of develop, that kind of partnership with kind of local authorities develop further, that actually communities can access this resource through that. And I suppose I could take the opportunity to show you kind of fabulous development trusts in action, but we have been our Kirkcaldy later, so I'm just going to leave it for Susie to kind of take you through your paces on development trusts. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda. I think we'll pass straight over to Phil, please. Phil, you're on mute.
Got me? That's you, Phil.
Have you got my screen?
You're not
Yeah.
sharing anything yet.
Okay,
That's you.
grand. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming along to our session today, looking at resources and sort of toolkits in terms of placemaking and delivery models. The one that I'm going to speak about today is Scotland's Improvement District. So the bid model, it's almost 15 years old across the UK just now. We have steady growth, 330 odd bids in the UK. Scotland's got more than its per capita share, somewhere between 38 to 40 bids in the country just now, ranging from large city bids in Edinburgh and Aberdeen, right down to smaller bids in the likes of Dunoon. And we've got quite a strong pipeline of developing bids, community improvement districts, etc. So the key points that I would like to make today in terms of a delivery model, this is primarily business-led. So within the town or city centre or the neighbourhood, it's a fantastic flexible mechanism to actually allow collaborative investment, to build consensus, to build partnership, but also importantly to bring in a sustainable revenue stream. Very difficult to get revenue in the current economic climate. So unleashing the power of business investment, where businesses consensually can see, you know, we've got a vested interest, this is our area, we would like to be able to hand this on in terms of our family or legacy. So they've got a vested interest to invest, co-invest in their own area to make it work better. The model itself, so a group of business leaders will come together and form a steering group. From that, they will develop a business plan. That business plan will also decide the geography. It will decide who's in, who's out, who would be the main beneficiaries, who are going to be the bigger investors, etc. And then that's put to a democratic vote. And it is a very, very democratic process in terms of minimum turnouts. A majority has to vote for the proposal. There has to be majority by rateable value as well. So there's a number of checks and balances within the legislative framework to make sure that it's all done very transparently and very democratically. So that the bid will be formed, and ultimately it's up to the bid then to deliver on its business plan, and that's how it'll be measured in terms of its success. Over the course of the pandemic, the bids were given an opportunity to shine, and I think by and large they did. Obviously, there was an emergency response required, so the Scottish Government very quickly moved to tweak the legislation to make sure bids were included within the coronavirus emergency legislation. We weren't able to renew our democratic mandate in the middle of a pandemic, so we were able to allow bids to continue to function. And then as soon as it was practically possible, they were able to go back to their electorate and get voted back in again. And I have to say, that's another key message with the Business Improvement District. There's something like a success rate of 95%. So once a Business Improvement District is established, every 5 years it has to go back to renew its mandate. And typically 95% of the time that mandate is renewed. So it's the proof in the pudding that the bid is actually doing what it set out to do. Through the last 18 months or so, we've seen a number of Scottish Government initiatives to try and drive local response. So we started off originally way back with the Resilience Fund, and we were able to get money out to our business improvement districts to deal with the emergency, to look at vulnerability, to make sure all of the businesses within that district were actually being supported. As we moved into recovery phase, again, a second tranche of money was issued by Scottish Government, the Towns and Bids Resilience and Recovery Fund, and that allowed the bids again to react very quickly to reopen the local economy, to reconnect with local citizens, to keep that partnership in place. We also offered advice on renewal ballots, and again, thankfully, the vast majority of our bids have successfully renewed. And there's currently a further phase of Scottish Government funding that's just about to be issued for the bids to actually consolidate recovery. That's just an example of some of the things that the bids managed to achieve during the pandemic. You know, building on partnerships, building on the whole localism message, Scotland loves local, all the practical information signposting, even the PPE support, etc. But what we're trying to do is expand on the flexibility in Scotland and to sort of stretch the model as far as possible. Scotland's unique in that we have a sort of more variants of the traditional bid model. You know, across England particularly, you see bids will be focused in town and big city centres. In Scotland, we've got a range of different types of bid, and it just shows you the flexibility of actually the model that we've got. So we're trying to promote the community improvement district. We're seeing that in Possil in North Glasgow, where the social landlord North Glasgow Homes, along with the police, along with the local MSP, along with the business community, both large and small, and also the immigrant population more recently, and also the Chinese population, sort of coming together as a community. And again, partnering with the City Council, just looking at how all of the people who've got a responsibility in that area have got a role to play. And the bid itself, they will be able to go off and do specific things based on their revenue and their business plan, but that fits into the wider place plan with all the other key partners around the table. So we've also got a food and drink improvement district. That's the only one in the UK, in East Lothian, a series of local producers who now in collection and collaboration can actually access bigger marketplaces and the supermarkets, etc. So it's allowing that food market to grow sustainably. We've got a number of tourism improvement districts. We've got Moray and Speyside, Tweed Valley, Inverness, Loch Ness. And again, that's a very sector specific approach. So we're looking at the destinations, the hoteliers, the food and drink, the hospitality, the transport providers. But again, that seems to work well. So the message here is that there isn't one size fits all. This is a sort of place-based tool that's very flexible, and it also unleashes, importantly, a new form of private investment. It's bringing in private sector money into the conversation. We're not resting on our laurels, though. We do know that we have to improve the model. So over the course of the coming year, we will be further engaging with the bid sector, the bid industry, Scottish Government, local government, etc., and other key stakeholder partners to see how can we improve this model? How can we get it to work in more places? So, for example, could we get a more streamlined model that would be fit for purpose in the south of Scotland with the new enterprise agency because they're smaller towns? Could we do a hub and spoke model where one central resource could actually feed out and support multiple bids across that region, similar to the Highlands as well? So that's just a quick fly through in terms of bids. It is democratically accountable. The main strengths are that there are no freeloaders. So as opposed to a voluntary business association where people are asked, do you want to pay your membership this year? It's actually compulsory for people within the levy district to pay their levy. So it's also 5 years, up to 5 years, which gives you a reasonable amount of time to actually deliver stuff and to be visible in terms of your progress. So those are the key fundamental things that the bid can actually offer. I think it's key just to remember the flexibility in all of that, and that the variance around community, around digital, around food and drink, around tourism, just shows that it can be deployed in a large number of contexts. So I'd like to see something like a creative district, cultural district. These are all potentials in the future. That's me. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Phil. And finally, I'm going to pass over to Mick, who's going to come on and talk with his presentation. So Mick, thank you.
I'm saying I see we're running slightly late, so I'll see if I can pick up the pace a bit and get us back on track if I can. Excuse me. Can you see the screen okay? So our Supporting Communities programme has been running for a number of years. It's funded through the Scottish Government Strengthening Communities programme, and here's a quote from what that programme is trying to do overall about developing the nature of the community sector and the community anchor organisations for the next generation, which relates to place, to urban context, to rural context, to community-led regeneration in all of its forms. And what we're trying to do is develop, I guess the what of the programme is around developing the organisations and networks to help set the agenda and address the issues that matter to them in the places that they are in, and to be better organised, be more inclusive and more influential as part of that process. So it's around developing the infrastructure as the policy opportunities for community empowerment and placemaking develop, there is the need to make sure that communities themselves are enabled to have the tools at their disposal and have their own capacity developed and built to drive community-led regeneration. Not exclusively, because we're obviously part of an ecosystem that all of the other organisations on the call occupy as well, and we quite often work alongside DTAS, COS, and and other partners. And the actual support often takes the form of workers providing mentoring, advice, and direct support, sometimes with on the ground community development support or technical support around survey analysis or these kind of things. During COVID, like everyone else, we've had to pivot and do more work around the pandemic for two reasons, really. One is most of the organisations we work with were unable to do the things that we would normally support them with through the programme and needed to shift to provide emergency support and aid. And we supported that in some of the localities we work with, although we had to move that online like everyone else. But we also supported infrastructure developments through things like the development of our Supporting Communities Safely resource, which provided technical advice to groups trying to analyse government guidance, make it digestible and understandable, help them with their decision making and planning for restarting places, with a lot of practical tools, including things like a space calculator for how you worked out the social distance calculation in your spaces. And that seems to have been very welcome, with 27,000 users at the moment. Where are we working? We're working across Scotland in almost every local authority, from remote rural areas to disadvantaged urban areas and sort of all points in between. In a couple of cases, we're working with communities of interest. We're working with one at the moment, which is a mental health community of folk in recovery in the Eastern Bartonshire area. And we've been working with about 60 localities over the life of the programme. And currently we're working in 10 sites. That's 8 of them listed there. There's a couple of them are still in negotiation, in a mixture of environments. And the Loch Alsh one, for example, is a coalition of 7 community councils and 3 trusts working to develop 7 local action plans and a Loch Alsh-wide plan for that neck of the woods. The criteria for how and where we deploy are fairly straightforward and won't surprise people, but they're around the levels of the SIND levels, but also other poverty indicators or disadvantage indicators, particularly around remote rural factors, which don't show up quite the same way. Looking at other ways that there might be demonstrable needs and or existing capacity and opportunities to build on. And also looking at the state of infrastructure and whether there are levels of potential community collaboration that we can work with, because we're very conscious of the fact that we're not a replacement for a grassroots community development service, nor can we be. We have to build on partnerships with other places. So in practice, we support the building of the anchor organisations that Linda and others have referred to, whether that's a single organisation or a distributed anchor process where organisations might share the anchor role between themselves. We would support the process of community-led action planning, and that would include training on the action planning process, as well as the technical support to pulling together action plans alongside other briefing and training on the Empowerment Act, the national standards for engagement in specific issues like co-production or the place principle or community-led research. Big part of what we're trying to do, as David mentioned early on in terms of the programme, is to have to tackle inequality and also try to address capacity building challenges where we can. There is a capacity building crisis at local level in Scotland, and we try to help groups address that by making the right connections, or in some cases putting in bids. And we also try to promote learning within and across the sites. In terms of the lessons, I think there are lessons we've learned about the importance of community confidence and trust. There's a big continuum of places where that's very high and other places where it's quite problematic, whether relationship challenges in the community anchor processes between trusts and community councils or between other local partners. That there is this capacity building crisis despite the fact that there are many amazing individual assets, particularly owned by community development trusts. And there's still a challenge, I think, around delegated authority and service reform, that in order to develop good quality place responses, services need to be free to adapt. And often I think that's lost in a kind of post-austerity cuts environment. And there are some challenges around cross-agency collaboration. And just finally, I wanted to finish with just raising a few kind of broader issues that, you know, we don't have the answers to. We're kind of hoping some folk here might have some perspectives that would be useful. So we are conscious that obviously communities face economic, physical and environmental and social dimensions to the regeneration work they're doing. And sometimes these are complementary and sometimes these can be in tension. And certainly neglecting one can have a negative impact on the others. And I'm reminded of an occasion a few years back when we were working to help a group in a small Scottish town to review its local community action plan, which in many respects was a town centre plan. And in fact, when they were successful in bringing other people to the table through improved engagement, some of the folk involved with the social issues in the town took the view that there were two towns and only one of them was reflected in the plan. So we're aware that there can be, not necessarily that there can be tensions between the needs of the economic regeneration environment and obviously between other groups in towns like young people or residents. It's not inevitable, but it's possible. And if we're trying to tackle inequality and exclusion, we're left with questions, I think, around what's the best way to balance, you know, these differing approaches and differing aspirations in town centres, and what are the implications for structures like bids and town centre partnerships. So that's me.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all Linda, Phil and Mick. So as I said at the start, the team have been reading all the comments that you're making in the background and trying to organise these into some broader themes. While they review these, I'm going to go back slightly and start with a question for David from Shona McCoy, who asks how the shared plan prepared through the place framework will relate to local place plans. David, and we are definitely running slightly behind schedule, so David can ask for a quick, and then we'll come back to comment the questions for the other three. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, and it's a great question, and hopefully the answer is seamlessly. So it's one that we're alive to. We don't want to complicate things by creating another layer of plans. Ultimately, we would like shared plans. Start with what we've got and let's build on them. So whether that be a community action plan, whether it be a local place plan, whether it be something else, you know, let's just start with what we've got and then evolve them and turn them into shared plans if they're not already. Specifically on local place plans, my understanding is, talking to planning colleagues, is there's not a statutory requirement to pull together a local place plan, but if that work is done, then you know you can request that becomes the sort of the plan that everyone works to. So as I say, hopefully it'll be seamless. No doubt there'll be some work to do to make sure that happens, but that's the starting point.
Thank you very much, David. I've got a question in here from Alistair Brown, specifically for Mick, but I think Phil and Linda will also have thoughts on this question. So the question, Mick, is specifically around remote and rural factors, asking about what specific factors you're looking at within these rural island communities. SIMD is often seen as limiting opportunities for project development and funding in these areas. But I guess for Phil and Linda, if you can think about that from a broader perspective as well, in that issue around SIMD and how we use data and statistics to inform decision making.
Well, I think that one of the limitations of SIMD is that it's focused on clusters and concentrations of disadvantage, whereas in rural areas, and particularly in remote rural areas, it's often actually dispersed disadvantage that's the issue, and how at small places and individual households are affected by the interrelationship between factors. Like, I was just looking at something this morning actually around childcare and access to after school care, and the fact that in remote rural areas the requirement to use the school bus to get home, which might take you an hour and a half, rules you out of any anti-poverty measures like homework clubs, probably means you can't use any after school care if it exists. And, you know, just as a sort of practical limitation on other services that might be there to mitigate disadvantage and create the opportunities for folk to work. So transport, fuel poverty, you know, the distance from services like mental health services, housing, a critical issue, you know, and then in some places, of course, the impact of climate change. If you look at an area like Lochalsh as a series, an interlinked series of coastal communities, and look at what might happen to the sea level over the next 20 to 30 years, And all of these issues are really significant for these areas, but they don't necessarily jump out at you when you look at a relatively crude measure like SIMD. And interestingly, if you looked at the COVID vulnerability map that the Scott PHO folk produced, the Lochalsh area actually scored very highly because it had a major distance from services, from medical services, and an ageing population, which was vulnerable to the illness. So those would be the sort of issues. It's about the interrelationship, I think, and the dispersed nature, which makes it harder sometimes to identify and prioritise the need. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks very much, Mick. Can I ask Linda and Phil very quickly to give us your thoughts on SIMD and data use from a broader perspective?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have much more to add to Mick's comment in particular around about data, but from kind of our experience in terms of community interest and communities coming forward in terms of reacting to that, either in terms of that establishing development trusts looking to take on ownership. We have a very high proportion of activity in rural Scotland and in the islands. So that's kind of all I would say is that kind of reacting to threat and kind of market failure does actually, communities are coming forward with kind of options for that.
Phil?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly, SIMD is very blunt. I mean, for example, in wealthy areas like East Lothian, East Dunbartonshire, East Renfrewshire, it actually masks some really intense pockets of deprivation. You know, so in the middle of Newton Mearns, you've got Old Mearns Estate, where there's actually high levels of poverty, but you would never think. In terms of the rural issue, to be honest, we're sort of blind to that. It's a wee bit like what Linda says. We just, our services are offered to everyone. We are trying to push the model. For example, the island of Bute, we're hopeful that becomes the first whole island bid in the country. It's currently live out for ballot just now. But that's looking at how the uniqueness of rural Scotland and the fragility of rural Scotland can actually play in our favour of consolidation, collaboration, partnership, all hands to the pump. So everybody in the island, from the big private sector people like Mount Stewart House to CalMac to the council to Highlands and Islands Enterprise, all of these guys working together collaboratively to support the Business Improvement District and the community. So we are aware of the fragility and the difficulties around SIMD, but to be honest, we sort of are a wee bit blind to it. We just tend to offer services as and when we can support local communities.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to. There are a bunch of other questions. I think what we'll try and do is wrap up these questions in the follow-up note and try and address them. Then we'll get ourselves back onto the agenda, or better onto the agenda. So thank you again, David, Linda, Phil, and Mick. Our next presentation today comes from James McMorrow, who's a partner at the legal firm Harper McLeod, to talk about legal structures for place management. James is an expert in the field of public sector structures and community vehicles with a track record in developing innovative funding and service delivery models. After James speaks, we have another Q&A session, so please keep those questions coming in to us. Thank you. So James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thanks very much for inviting me along today. I'm really interested to hear the other presentations that we've had this afternoon. I think the first thing I would say on legal structures is that despite what many lawyers will tell you, we're not the most important people in these types of projects or initiatives, and it's very much about form and legal structures following function. So really important to understand what it is you want to do and what you're looking to achieve, who you're looking to engage with, who you might be looking to attract in terms of members, and who you may wish to look for funding from before you decide on your legal structure. That being said, the first, I think, major consideration for you in relation to the way in which you establish your organisation is to look at whether to incorporate or not. And I think in the vast majority of cases, as Linda's already said, I think almost invariably the most appropriate thing to do is going to be to look at an incorporated structure, some form of body corporate. There is inevitably more complexity in that structure and more in terms of setup costs, but the significant benefits, I think, of an incorporated structure really heavily outweigh the simplicity of the unincorporated structure. That being said, for smaller scale or less formal projects, it may be that you would look to some sort of unincorporated association status. An unincorporated association does come with a number of fairly significant disadvantages, though. The first of which is that it has no, what I would call, separate legal personality. It isn't a separate legal body distinct from its members. So all of the members of the organisation collectively will make up the unincorporated association. And that means that the unincorporated association, it can't enter into contracts in its own name, it can't own property in its own name, it can't obtain funding in its own name, and it can't sue or be sued in its own name. It would have to do all of those things in the name of a number of the members or all of the members in certain cases. So it can create quite significant problems in terms of ownership and legal responsibility. And it also brings with it the very significant problem of what's called joint and several liability. An unincorporated association, because it doesn't have any separate legal status, all of its members will be what's called jointly and severally liable for any of the liabilities or debts or other obligations of the organisation. So that means that any one or more individual members could be, for example, pursued for or liable for the obligations of the association. It's not that if you've got 100 members, then each of them is liable for a 1/100th share. Any one of the members can be deemed liable for all of the obligations of the association. So potentially very significant personal liability issues within an unincorporated association, which really make it unsuitable for larger or more complex projects of the type we're talking about at the moment. And I think finally the other issue is that there's a significant lack of credibility within an unincorporated association. It may make it more difficult to engage meaningfully with your community or with prospective funders or counterparties. So unless it's a very small scale project involving relatively insignificant liabilities and obligations, I think I'd also always be recommending some form of incorporated structure. And that then takes us to a range of different body corporate options. The three most common ones that I would come across for, at least for non-charitable organisations, I'll come on to talk about charities in a moment, but there's the company limited by guarantee, there's the community interest company, and there's the registered society, or what used to be called an industrial and provident society. I think, as Linda said, I think by far the most common structure would be some form of limited company, either a company limited by guarantee, which doesn't have shareholders, but rather it has members. It's a non-profit distributing model. So unlike with a company limited by shares, where shareholders invest in and obtain a financial return from their investment in and their shareholding in the company, the members of the company limited by guarantee don't share in the profits of the organisation, but they do enjoy the other benefits of a company limited by guarantee. So importantly, and distinct from the unincorporated association, they enjoy what's called limited liability, which means that the members of a company limited by guarantee don't have any significant personal liability beyond a nominal amount, which is usually £1. So in the event that the company is wound up and it doesn't have sufficient assets to meet its liabilities, then all that each of the members would be liable for would be £1. So significant benefit of limited liability. And companies limited by guarantee and other companies also have legal status, so they can enter into their own arrangements in their own name. They can acquire property, they can assume funding, they can enter into contracts, they can employ staff, etc., all in their own name. A subset of the company limited by guarantee, if you like, is the community interest company. A community interest company, it is not a different type of company. It can be a company limited by guarantee, but it has particular provisions within its constitution, which would be its articles of association, which make it specifically recognised as a community interest company. So there will be, for example, with a community interest company, it will have to benefit a particular defined community. It will also enjoy the benefit of an asset lock set of provisions, which mean that its assets can only be used for community interest purposes. And if the CIC is wound up, its assets need to go to another similar community-focused and community-minded body. So the assets can't be used for non-community purposes. And there are also caps upon the extent to which individual members can benefit from their membership of the CIC. So many of the benefits of the community interest company can be replicated with a company limited by guarantee structure. So sometimes it can often be considered that a CIC is an unnecessary additional step, an additional layer of complexity and regulation for companies. But equally, many organisations like to have that badge of community interest as a formal part of their constitutional model. And that's certainly a model that we often see being utilised. The registered society or industrial and provident society, as it used to be called, is a less common model. Very prevalent in the social housing sector, less so, I think, in the community sector. And from a legal perspective, there aren't that many significant differences between a registered society and a company, but on balance, I would always recommend a company rather than a registered society. The next thing to think about in terms of incorporation is whether it would be appropriate to look to obtain charitable status. Sorry, there's a number of helicopters going overhead at the moment. So apologies, hope that's not coming through too loud on the presentation. Yeah, charitable status. Many organisations in this sector or in these areas will consider charitable status. If you're looking at charitable status, then you can be a charitable company limited by guarantee. A community interest company can't be a charity, but a company limited by guarantee can be. And if you're looking at charitable status, there's also a further corporate model available to you, which is the SCIO, or Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation, which is a particular type of body corporate only available to Scottish charities. Charitable status is something that I think you need to think quite carefully about if you're looking at it. There are significant benefits, primarily tax and financial benefits for you, but charitable status does come with a number of constraints. With charitable status, you can only operate in furtherance of one or more specific charitable purposes, so you can't engage in activities which fall out with your charitable purposes, and that may mean that the charitable structure is somewhat less flexible than a non-charitable structure. Because if there's something that you want to do which isn't covered by your charitable objects, then you will need to formally amend your objects, and you'll need to obtain the consent of the Scottish charity regulator before doing so. So it can be a somewhat inflexible structure and something to bear in mind, but it certainly comes with relatively significant tax benefits in terms of corporation tax relief, rates relief, and other tax benefits. And it can also open up potential funding avenues that aren't available to non-charitable organisations. So definitely something to think about and bear in mind. A couple of other things to think about in terms of constitutional and governance arrangements. Key issues for drafting your constitution: think about what your objects and purposes are. For example, what particular community will you be serving, and what will you be doing in that community? What will your membership structure and model be, bearing in mind that it's absolutely critical that you're sufficiently accountable to the communities with which you're working or in which you're operating. So think about membership and accountability. What are the eligibility criteria? How open or restricted will you make your membership? And in that regard, very important to bear in mind some of the issues that have been raised already this afternoon around things like community right to buy, community empowerment, community asset transfer. If you are looking to exercise any of the statutory rights you've got under community empowerment or land reform legislation, then your constitution will need to contain certain specific elements, including things like entirely open membership for community members. So something to bear in mind if you are looking to community empowerment or community ownership interest models. Other things to think about will be the governance structures, board composition and decision making, funding, employees and resourcing, and as I said earlier, the structure may be driven in some cases by your requirements for particular funding sources. So I'm conscious that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through constitutional models and legal issues, but I'll be very happy to take questions as we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. That was a great overview of legal structures, given in a way that was understandable even to someone like me. While we're working out questions in the background and thinking, and again, trying to keep us on track, there are a number of questions coming through, but I think you seem to have addressed most of these as you've talked over them. Can I just ask a kind of a wrap-up overview question? Can you talk very quickly around some of the common mistakes that places make when they're thinking about models and what impact they have? So you covered the issues around incorporated and unincorporated structures really well. I'm thinking about some of the broader things, whether it's people be taken too late in considering the structures, or whether they take a short-term view on that. If you can just give us 1 or 2 minutes, please, on that, and that would get us back on track. Thank you.
Sure, of course. I think one of the key things is being consultative and ensuring you are sufficiently accountable. So I think an early step is to ensure you've properly engaged with all of your key stakeholders. Obviously, the most important stakeholder being the members of the community that you're looking to operate in and benefit. So I think consulting with them, making sure you understand what their needs and requirements are before you embark too far along the incorporation road is really important. Other key stakeholders would be public sector bodies like the local authority, other charities, RSLs, etc., operating in your area, and also prospective funders, to ensure that you don't set your constitutional model in stone and then find that it doesn't work for one or more key stakeholders. So I think doing that work early is really important. I think the other thing to bear in mind is to try and build as much flexibility into your model as you can. When we're drafting constitutions or helping with the setup for organisations, they will often say, well, we're definitely not going to do X, so don't include that in the constitution, or we're definitely not going to do Y. And I always say, well, unless that is an absolute, will not pass go, it's always better to try and build a degree of flexibility into your constitutional model. Because what you don't want to do is get up and running and then want to take advantage of a particular opportunity and move quickly, and then find that your constitution doesn't allow you to do that. And then you're having to go back and potentially amend the constitution, get members' consent, potentially get OSCR consent if you're a charitable organisation. By the time you've done all that, the opportunity's gone, or it's not as optimised as it might be. So I think insofar as possible, you're building a good degree of flexibility into the model. And then the last thing I think would be being robust in terms of your governance and decision making. So understand your constitution, understand what parameters you can operate in, and you recognise the potential risks associated with particular courses of action, and make sure you've got robust decision making processes in place that are also transparent. And that then feeds into accountability to your community and accountability to other key stakeholders. So clients who get any one or more of those things wrong tend not to be successful as clients who've properly thought about these types of things. So those would be my 3 top tips off the top of my head.
Great, thank you very much. As someone that spent many years appraising and evaluating structures, absolutely flexibility and governance and accountability top of the tree to get these things correct. So thank you very much, James. We really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And we're almost back on time now. So to complete this afternoon's session, I'm really pleased that we have practical examples from 2 places that are making a big impact on their local communities. And our second slight tweak to the agenda, Roger Smith, one of the founding directors of Truerlane, is now covering Dufftown and Murray, followed by Susie Goodseer, Chief Executive of Greener Kirkcaldy, talking about her experiences in the Fife town of Kirkcaldy. And again, after these 2 10-minute presentations, we have our final Q&A session of the day. So questions again, please. And over to you, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thanks again for inviting us to share our story today. Like I say, unfortunately, Marianne was unable to make it, so I stepped in on her behalf. So please bear with me. Truerlane, it's not an easy company to categorise, and that has proved to be both a blessing and a curse. We're a new breed of socio-economic regeneration company that focuses on using positive and sustainable economic growth to lift communities out of decline. The initial idea for Truerlane and for Dufton and New Dawn, which is the first full-scale deployment of our business model, actually came out of the first lockdown. Like many others, we found ourselves at home, and Marianne, who I've worked with for over 20 years, gave me a call just for a natter. And she started telling me all about Dufton, her hometown. And she and Richard, her husband, had been going through some of his father's old photographs, and they realised just how much Dufton had changed over the last few decades, almost without anyone noticing. And we talked about the way the town had suffered through business closures and younger people moving away. And people who used to stop in Dufton when they visited the distilleries, they weren't stopping anymore, as there were fewer places for them to shop, eat and visit. And a few days and many conversations later, Truerlane was born with the simple aim of reversing that trend and to help return Dufton to its former glory at the heart of Speyside. We very much believe that many well-intentioned regeneration projects fail not due to a lack of funding, but due to a lack of vision and joined up big picture thinking. So when we looked at what Dufton might need to get back on its feet, it was clear that a mixture of jobs, amenities, appropriate housing, and sustainable inward investment were the key elements. Dufton, it's the malt whisky capital of the world, but over the years, it's lost out to other areas in terms of tourists visiting for longer than a day. Visit Murray Speyside are doing a fantastic job promoting the local and wider region, and have been incredibly supportive of the work we're doing. But in order to reinvigorate the town and to bring those visitors and repeat visitors back, we need to provide more amenities, more restaurants, a greater range of accommodation, as well as building a more proactive and professional destination marketing machine to properly support the work that Visit Murray Speyside are already doing. Unfortunately, COVID has compounded the problems in Dufton. It's pushed more local business owners into making decisions about their future. Our local butcher had worked in the town for more than 40 years and he wanted to retire. The local sandwich takeaway has decided not to reopen after lockdown, and the owners of the local chip shop also decided to retire instead of reopening. And that meant another 3 important local businesses faced closure, with the inevitable knock-on impact on the high street and on local jobs. We are a for-profit model, and we're not ashamed of that, but we're a purpose-driven profit model. And we firmly believe that the establishment of a strong economic foundation with successful local businesses will lay the groundwork required to lift the entire community. Our plan for Dufton's regeneration includes launching a number of new businesses and safeguarding those at risk of closure. So we've reopened the local sandwich takeaway. We've taken on the butcher with a new master butcher at the helm, who in turn has taken over training the local apprentices. We'll reopen the chip shop soon, and we have plans for 2 additional restaurants, a country pub, a boutique hotel, as well as plans for a carbon neutral housing development. We're also setting up a not-for-profit company dedicated to putting Dufton back on the tourist map. Basically, we're trying to address every challenge or weakness that has led us to where we are now. And that means that under the one Dufton and New Dawn project, we have anywhere between 10 and 30 live and potential sub-projects on the go at any one time, each one requiring investment and support. But first and foremost, we're a regeneration company. We're not here to be running a butcher or a pub in any town in 10 years' time. Our aim is to create the right conditions that will allow local entrepreneurs to grow their own businesses without the barriers and risks that can often accompany a launch. So as part of our model, over a period of 3 to 5 years, we will gift shares in each business to the senior manager who eventually wants to take that business over as their own. Then once that business is on the right path to growth and both parties are comfortable and happy, the manager will have the opportunity to buy us out of the remaining 51%, should they wish to do so. Hopefully I'm kind of making the point that our plan it's actually large scale, it's ambitious, and it's quite complex, but our approach is unique, and we're yet to speak with anyone who's seen our business model before. And that's why we know it'll succeed, but it's also been a major hurdle in securing funding. Sadly, one thing we have learned is that when you're trying to do something new and innovative that doesn't fit into the pre-established boxes of the financial industry or government funding, it's almost impossible to get off the ground. We've spent over a year conducting research and due diligence to support Dufton and Newdale, and so far have 2 businesses operating successfully in the town, with another one set to launch in the coming weeks. We've hired or retained the jobs of 12 local staff, with another 6 people set to join the team soon. And that's just the start. On the face of it, we're ticking most, if not all, of the boxes for government funding. We're creating economic growth opportunities, employment, we're upskilling and more. Yet our status as a commercial enterprise has prevented us from securing any financial support from local or national government. We've managed to achieve what we've achieved so far through a mixture of commercial finance and private angel investment from individuals who recognise our commitment to sustainability and social improvement, and who agree with our values of helping communities lift themselves out of decline. We're proud of what we've achieved so far, but we're also a little bit frustrated because it's obvious how much further along we would be with government support. And beyond all of that, we've learned more than we ever wanted to know about the lack of creative thinking in and around the financial sector. In order to get past the gatekeepers, we've been forced to make our faces fit, and we've had to break the project down into a structure that fits their current risk matrix. I mean, we're not experienced CFOs or financial industry experts, so perhaps we were a little bit naive in thinking that with the right context and explanation, the original presentation of the project as a whole would be enough to win funding and support. Indeed, it's exactly that holistic overview that's encouraged the private investors who've supported us so far. They don't want to be investors in a chip shop or a pub. They want to be supporters of a project that has greater potential to reinvigorate a community and create the conditions for investors not to be needed in the future. But if Scotland wants to be seen as an innovation leader, we need to encourage all parts of that value chain to support innovative thinking and not rely on entrepreneurs to fit into tired, outdated models in order to access finance. We need governments and local authorities to recognise the role that a commercial enterprise built from experts in their field can play in delivering community improvements versus, very well-intentioned yet often part-time voluntary organisations who are, for the most part, not equipped with the skills, vision, time or rigour to deliver value against investment. I mean, this last year, it's been a steep learning curve for us, and we recognise that things can't and they won't change overnight. So we've learned quickly to pick our battles and to mask our kind of unique approach with a more conventional makeover. But, we've also engaged with some brilliant partners and advisors to help us better navigate the funding landscape so that we don't fall foul of the FCA and can access different funding options faster and more effectively. We're still very early on in our journey, and we've only really started phase 2 of Dufton's 5 to 6 phase regeneration plan. And we expect it to start delivering significant impact in the next 3 to 5 years. Dufton, it's been the right project for us to start with, as it's personal to us. Over half the team live there. And that has made us even more stubbornly committed to find our way around these challenges. The partners we've met and the hurdles we've continued to overcome, they, in our view, make our project stronger and secure that blueprint for us to scale up or down for other regeneration projects. In fact, Phil Prentice challenged us a wee while ago to demonstrate how our approach could scale to address different communities in decline. And we jumped at that opportunity. We are currently speaking with a more rural community, which has invited us with the full knowledge and acceptance that we are a commercial company to provide a fresh perspective on how to address their own issues in a more structured and sustainable way. I can't give you much detail at this stage, but we're really excited to see how we can apply holistic, big picture placemaking to a wider variety of communities and develop that blueprint to be applied across the country. For us, Dufton is just the start, but by making government funding more accessible to commercial organisations, obviously with the right checks and balances in place, and encouraging financiers to think more creatively and positively about the relationship between innovation and risk, we believe that we'll see more communities thrive to the benefit of everyone. As for us, we're very much looking forward to driving that evolution forward. Thank you. I hope that gives you an understanding of what we at Trulane are currently working towards. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Roger. That's a really interesting and innovative commercial approach you've just described there. We're waiting for cues to come in from people. While they're coming in, can I please go to Susie Goodseer, Chief Executive at Greener Kirkcaldy, please? Thank you, Susie.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Roger. That's a really, really interesting story. I work for Greener Kirkcaldy, a community-led charity and development trust based in Kirkcaldy, a large town in the Kingdom of Fife. And we take a very different approach. Our aims and values are summed up by this cartoon. We're very much about the environment and sustainability, but we're also all about the other benefits of taking action on climate change, social justice, community development, and regeneration. We're set up legally as a company limited by guarantee and a registered charity. Greener Kirkcaldy was started in 2009 by a group of local volunteers, and we've grown since then to now have 26 staff, around 80 regular volunteers, and about 5,000 Facebook followers, which is my metric for how much reach we have in the community. We're part of the Development Trust movement. There's organisations, as we've heard, like us all over the country, community-led, enterprising, creative, but most importantly, working to improve the quality of life for people in their communities. We're not a specialist town centre group, but the projects we run do bring jobs, volunteer opportunities, and customers into the town centre. Our employability and our anti-poverty work mean that people have got more money in their pockets, and that helps the local economy too. And we also provide some direct support and advice to local businesses, particularly around environmental improvements they can make. So I'm going to show a short video now that gives an overview of our work. It was made in late 2019, so pre-COVID. You'll notice no one's wearing a mask.
Greener Kirkcaldy is a community-led charity working locally to benefit people and our environment. We'd like to see a future where everybody's able to eat well, heat their homes affordably and tread more lightly on the planet.
So we deliver a number of projects to meet the needs and aspirations of local people, help the environment and bring the community together. We've got our new building at 8 East Fergus Place. We love showing people around. Last year, volunteers contributed about 3,000 hours to our projects, so we really couldn't do all the work we do in our community without our volunteers.
We've got a community garden. It's a much more sustainable way of feeding yourself, so getting a few more local people to join in doing that is an amazing thing to do. Who wouldn't like being out in a garden all day?
Our aim was and still is to reduce carbon emissions, but we quickly realised that saving money was a big issue for people too, with many people all over Fife struggling to pay high fuel bills. We created the Cosy Kingdom Partnership, which is a free and impartial energy and debt advice service, and that's available to all tenants and homeowners right across Fife.
So we've been running some outdoor kids clubs to get kids more engaged with the outdoors. It's been very popular, it's been a great success.
People can learn to cook so that they are using up leftovers. We're able to bring things from the garden fresh into the kitchen.
So we've got a repair and reuse project, which is all about encouraging people to reduce their waste going to landfill. We have a community fridge. It's a great way for businesses and anyone in the community to redistribute any food. We've got a transport project, which is encouraging people to travel a bit greener.
It has knock-on effects, people's health and well-being, enjoying the green space. Climate change is a real and urgent problem.
We've only got one planet, we've got to do our best to protect it.
What we do may be very small, but cumulatively that makes a lot of difference.
People come in and tell us what changes they're making at home and how we've helped them to do that, and it's great for us to hear that feedback.
Greener Kirkcaldy is absolutely dedicated to a greener Kirkcaldy and a greener Fife.
So that was us in 2019, and you'll have seen our town centre community hub there, which is owned by the Development Trust, so it's in community ownership and was purchased with funding from the Scottish Land Fund and a major refurbishment carried out with Big Lottery funding a couple of years ago. And we were open for about a year, and then COVID happened. So we adapted really quickly. We realised that with our resources of people, funding and facilities, we could really help. We moved our events online where possible, and we played a key role in the local emergency response. We made and delivered over 10,000 meals for vulnerable people in Kirkcaldy, and our energy advice team made crisis gas and electric meter top-ups for hundreds of families who are at risk of disconnection. We also started up new projects that are going to last way beyond the pandemic. The photo on the right there shows our new food pantry project, which collects food that was unsold or surplus from local businesses and redistributes it to members who shop at the pantry once a week for a small fee, a much more dignified alternative to a food bank. We started a cycle social enterprise, noting that Kirkcaldy, a town of 50,000 people, didn't have a bike shop. So the Langtoon Cycles community bike shop is now based in a shop on the high street that had been empty for years. And just to explain the name, Kirkcaldy is known locally as the Langtoon due to our very long high street. We started up a major partnership project, Climate Action Fife, which is piloting a range of projects to tackle climate change, working with Fife Council, Fife College, and a network of other community groups across the region. And we also last year helped set up and initially fund Lover Langtoon, which is a new town centre regeneration initiative that's doing brilliant work, celebrating and promoting the town, and also working on some exciting longer term regeneration and community wealth building projects. And I don't have time to talk about Lover Langtoon in detail, but I will share a link to its website and a case study about it in the Scotland's Town Partnership Town Toolkit. I'll put that in the chat. So I think the development trust model works well for many reasons, and it's probably different in each town. But for me, the key things are really positivity about our town, community ownership and buy-in, and our ability to take risks, move quickly and try different approaches. We get great support from DTAS, and there's also a really strong culture of peer support again amongst the trusts as well. We also work with partners across all sectors, Fife Council, housing associations, local charities and local businesses. And I'll finish just by expressing gratitude to our funders. A few of them are in the room. Fife Council, Scottish Government, National Lottery, various trusts and foundations, and of course donations from our community and spend from the amazing customers of our social enterprise projects. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Susie, and also thank you to Roger. That was two very different approaches, but each embedded in the local communities that they're working within and addressing local context and local issues. Roger, I'm seeing a couple of questions coming in here specifically for you around funding, which you talked about, questions around the types of funding that you sought, whether it was local, regional or national level funding, and also what role you think public funding would have played within the development of the organisation, whether feasibility or investment funding. If you can give us a couple of minutes on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we have applied locally and regionally, and that got us nowhere. They were rejected. The national applications are ongoing and take quite a long time, inevitably, understandably, in the current climate. So that is an ongoing issue. An ongoing application. In terms of where we see it playing a role, the bottom line is we're not looking for investments into the businesses or for grants into the businesses. It's really, really important that each of these businesses can sustain itself. If it can't, the model fails. So the businesses have to be able to support themselves. Where we believe the investment from government would support us would be to upscale the feasibility and the work around supporting those businesses. So at the moment, we're doing that through finance coming in from ourselves and from and around the businesses. And that simply slows it down. It means that we are not able to upscale and develop at the speed we know we can. So the model itself is, as I've said, it's unashamedly commercial, and it will stand and it will succeed on that without the need for gifted funds. But that support, it's about speed and breadth and our ability to actually deliver more. Because a lot of the things we're doing are quite reactive. You know, as I mentioned, we saw 3 of the last major businesses in the town closing down. And if we'd left that for too long, if we hadn't responded quickly to that, they would have gone. And our chances of actually recovering those businesses would have been considerably harder. So it's the speed, it's our ability to react quickly and actually engage in the way that we need to with each of those individual businesses to give them the support that they need. So that's where we see that that bigger piece of funding supporting us. Does that answer that question?
I think it does, yes. Thank you very much, and good luck with your national level funding applications.
Very much.
Susie, can I please ask you, I think you said that you've been up and running for maybe about 10 years now as a project. Yeah. Can I ask you what you know now that you wish you'd known then, and particularly if there are any lessons that you think would be transferable or replicable for other parts of Scotland and other organisations working in places?
We've learned a lot about funding. That's been a really major issue. I think maybe 2 things. One, a detail, but a lot of early stage development trusts suffer with staff retention. And we made a strategic decision about 5 years ago to put our staff onto permanent contracts, which helped hugely. And we have, touch wood, not had to ever make any redundancies since then. So that's been a really important step, because I think the voluntary sector as a whole really struggles with short-term contracts and staff retention. I think the other kind of key point of learning is really the importance of working through these networks. So DTAS have been amazing to us, and you really get back what you put into these networks. So we share our learning a lot. We host study visits, we make study visits to other development trusts, and we talk informally, we network through more organised events, and the value that we get out of that is amazing.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Roger, I appreciate you've only been up and running for maybe about a year, but I guess same question over that past year. What do you wish you'd known a year ago that you know now? You're on mute.
Sorry, schoolboy error. I suppose it was, as I think I mentioned, it was that naivety in thinking that the sort of power of the aspiration was sufficient to drive funding, which it wasn't, because, you know, as I said, the local application was rejected because I don't think they believed us. I don't think they believed we were giving these businesses away once they were functioning. I don't think they fully understood the motivation for doing it. Which is unusual, I accept that. And I guess had we have understood that, we would have probably presented ourselves in a different way in the first instance, because that would have enabled us to move faster. So we've spent time sort of learning and understanding that, and that has, I think, slowed the process down. We were hoping to be further ahead than we currently are. I mean, it's particularly around things like sort of upskilling and training. You know, that's another area where that support would help us, and that's not such an easy one to commercialize. So, you know, whilst we are feeding that in at the moment to each individual business, I think, you know, that additional funding at that level would have supported that particular endeavour. So, yeah, I think it was just a bit more experience would have helped. But, you know, we're building a new model, so that's kind of part of that learning process. So we're not uncomfortable with that. We now know. So onward and upward.
Great, thank you. And just by way of roundup then, can I just ask each of you just quickly to tell us what piece of advice you've been given over the past, since you've been up and running, that's been most helpful in that sort of practical delivery sense. So Susie, do you want to go first with that one?
Not advice, but training on fundraising, because the amount of time people spend writing funding applications, it's really important to do that well.
I think from our perspective, I mean, Phil took Marion and I to one side at our community meeting and said, don't give up. He said, people will fight this, but the majority of people will support you. And I think that is true. So battling through, and the advice we got from some of the financial partners in terms of the way we framed our pitch to investors has been incredibly helpful. So.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm afraid, everyone, that's just about all we have time for today. So on behalf of STP, I'd like to give a very warm thank you to each of our 7 speakers. I'm sure you'll all agree that they gave us really thoughtful and considered presentations with lots of helpful advice and guidance that other places can learn from. Can I also finally thank all of you for making the time to attend today's session. So please keep your eyes peeled, or as a 4-year-old recently advised me, please peel your eyes back for details on our 3rd session on the Town Centre Action Plan review, details of which will be issued by the STP teams soon. There's a series of questions and a bunch of other questions that we haven't had time to answer today that we'll try and wrap up within the post-it note that Alison and Elaine and the team will be issuing. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you.